Welcome to Say the Question. I'm Joe, and with me is Sam. Today we're asking the annoying little question inside phone upgrade programs. If the new phone feels free, what are you actually signing up for?
Right, because that free feeling is doing a lot of work. Verizon says the promo value depends on staying eligible, so the deal can stop if you change plans, pay off early, or transfer your number.
Exactly. So the real issue is the fine print behind the glow. Let's start with the boring part that matters. What these programs actually are. Sam, start us off.
Phone upgrade programs always sound like the customer got clever. Oh look, I beat the system. New phone, same monthly damage. But the annoying question is whether free upgrade is actually free, or whether it just moves the pain into a place people stop looking.
Before we turn this into a rant, we should separate a few things. Sticker price, monthly payment, trade-in credit, and what happens if you want out. Those are not the same deal, even when the ad pretends they are. If we blur them, we end up arguing about vibes instead of the actual structure.
That's the core trick, though. People hear upgrade and think new shiny thing with no real consequence, when the real move may be that the phone, the financing, and the carrier agreement get tangled together so neatly you stop noticing where your money and freedom went. It feels like a purchase, but it can behave more like a long relationship with paperwork.
Am I hearing you right that the real complaint is less I paid money and more I lost clarity? Because those are different. One is just expensive. The other makes comparison shopping basically impossible, since the decision is spread across several buckets instead of sitting in one obvious price tag.
It's both, but the second one is nastier. If the monthly number looks fine, people don't ask what they're giving up later. Maybe they haven't fully paid for the phone. Maybe they have to trade it back. Maybe leaving the carrier gets uglier than they expected. The deal can feel light in the moment because the hard part is delayed, and delayed pain is way easier to ignore than pain in the checkout screen.
And that delay is exactly where these programs get their power. Not because every carrier is secretly twirling a mustache, but because most people do not want to do a full accounting while standing in a store. They want the clean story. You can have the new phone now. That story is emotionally convenient, which is why it works even when the math is messier than it first looks.
Yeah, and once the clean story is in your head, the rest gets treated like annoying footnotes. Ugh. That's how owning a phone turns into some weird three-part costume. Part purchase, part financing plan, part loyalty test. Nobody walks in thinking, I'd like a device and a little bit of captivity, please. But that can be the practical result if you're not careful.
That's the useful distinction, though. Ownership means one thing, financing means another, and being tied to a carrier means another. If a program blurs those, the customer can't tell whether they're buying a device, renting access to it, or just signing up to make leaving harder than they expected. And if you can't tell which part is doing the work, you can't really tell what you're paying for.
So the fair question isn't, is upgrading bad? It's, what exactly am I agreeing to? And what happens if I change my mind? And who gets the advantage if I don't read the fine print until year 2? Because the whole pitch can be built to feel optional while still nudging you to stay put. That's the part that makes people squint at it.
And if the answer to those questions is easy to explain, that's a good sign. If it takes 3 different explanations, a chart, and a customer service rep to tell me what I keep and what I owe, then the design is asking the buyer to do too much work. A clean offer should survive being described out loud.
Which is why I don't want to jump straight to good or bad yet. I just want the label to stop doing tricks for a minute. If this is really a financing plan with a trade-in promise and a carrier tie-in, say that plainly before everybody starts acting like the phone is free.
Mostly, yeah. The next step is just naming the machine honestly. Because once we do that, we can ask the real question. Is it a sensible way to spread the cost, or is it using convenience to hide the flexibility you lose later?
Okay, so let's strip the marketing varnish off this thing. When they say upgrade program, they usually mean a bundle of different moving parts, not one clean, magical offer. That matters because if you don't separate the parts, the whole thing starts sounding cheaper and simpler than it really is.
That's the useful place to start. There's the device payment agreement, there's the trade-in offer, there's the upgrade eligibility, and sometimes there's a service commitment or carrier condition sitting underneath it. Those are related, but they are not the same thing.
And normal people hear upgrade and think, cool, I'm getting a new phone. But that's not the same as owning the phone outright. And it definitely isn't the same as being free of the carrier's rules.
No, and that distinction is the whole ballgame. A device payment agreement is financing. Full stop. Verizon's own support material describes it that way and says the specific terms and payment amounts appear in the installment agreement and the first bill.
So the monthly number is just the number you see each month, not the whole story, because that's where people get pulled in. It looks like, oh, this is manageable. And then the fine print starts layering on the actual conditions.
Exactly. It can feel cheap because you're looking at one line item, while the rest of the deal is spread across time, eligibility rules, and whatever
Early.
happens if you leave.
And that's the part people don't clock fast enough.
Yeah, early. And the carrier part is what makes it harder to read. A T&T, for example, distinguishes its installment plans from promotion conditions in its support language. But in a sales pitch, those pieces can get mashed together so fast that the customer just hears, "You qualify," without hearing what they qualify for.
That mix is the whole trick, though. Same phone, different labels depending on who's talking. The salesperson wants it to sound like a clean upgrade. The paperwork is sitting there saying, actually, these are separate promises, separate rules, and maybe separate costs.
And to be fair, the overlap isn't always fake. Sometimes there's a real trade-in credit. Sometimes there's a real early upgrade path. And sometimes the carrier is just saying, if you meet these conditions, you get the better deal. The issue is that the customer-facing label can collapse all of that into one friendly phrase.
So is the issue the label or the way the label is carrying too many promises at once? Because those are different complaints. One is, this is annoying, and the other is, this is designed to blur the line between financing, trade-in, and staying locked in.
I'd put it more narrowly than designed to blur, unless we have more than the naming. But the practical test is simple. Am I financing the phone? Is there a trade-in promise? What makes me eligible to upgrade? And does any of this depend on staying with the carrier or keeping service active? If you can't separate those in plain English, the offer is doing too much at once.
That's the standard then. If the flyer only makes sense once you untangle the pieces, the wording is already smoothing over separate obligations, and that's exactly where the confusion lives. Okay, so the reason people get suspicious is pretty simple. The deal is designed to make you notice the small number first. You hear, just pay this much a month, and your brain goes, cool, that sounds manageable. Nobody is standing there doing a full total cost audit at the store counter when the new phone is shiny and the monthly hit feels tiny.
That's the emotional pressure point. Small monthly payment sounds like relief, even if the real question is what you're committing to overall and what happens if you want out before the story ends. People don't usually shop by, how trapped will I feel in 9 months? But that is basically part of the decision.
Right, and that's where the suspicion gets legs. Because the plan doesn't just sell you a phone, it sells you a feeling that the phone is not really costing you much. And the uncomfortable part gets shoved into the background where people are less likely to look. That background is where a lot of the real price lives.
And the background is usually where the obligations live. Maybe there's money still owed. Maybe there's a trade-in condition. Maybe there's a timing rule. Maybe you only get the nice version of the offer if you keep playing by their schedule. None of that has to be sinister to be annoying. It just means the easy part is not the whole part.
That part is why it feels a little shady even when nobody's breaking a rule. It's not that the numbers are necessarily hidden in a locked drawer. It's that the number you're meant to feel is the wrong number. The monthly payment is doing all the smiling while the actual obligations sit in the back with their arms crossed.
That's the clean version of the complaint. The headline is, "Look how cheap this is." And the decision is actually, how much flexibility am I giving up, and what do I owe if I change my mind? Those are not equivalent questions, but the sales pitch often makes them feel like they are.
Exactly. And people hate that because it feels like the offer is trying to talk them out of thinking too hard. Not in some cartoon villain way, just in the normal business way of making the easy answer loud and the hard answer quiet. The whole setup is basically, don't worry about future you. Current you will love this.
Which is why suspicion is reasonable, but we should keep it on the right side of the line. Reasonable suspicion is, this structure benefits from me not fully comparing the long-term cost. Overclaim is, they're all scamming people. Those are not the same thing. One is about incentives and presentation. The other is a fraud claim, and that's a much bigger accusation.
Fair. Joe, am I overstating it if I say the whole thing leans on convenience as a trap? Because that's what it feels like to me. Not a hard sell, just a soft one that gets sticky once you've already said yes. It is very hard to be intellectually heroic when the checkout process is easy and the consequences are abstract.
No, that's pretty close. Convenience can absolutely be its own sales engine. And the danger is that it makes the trade-off feel lighter than it is. If the process is easy to enter and annoying to unwind, people experience that as friendliness up front and friction later. That's not proof of bad intent, but it is a real design choice with a real effect.
And that mismatch is what makes people feel dumb after the fact, which is always a bad sign. Nobody wants to realize they signed up for something because the monthly number was doing a lot of emotional heavy lifting. The less they were forced to stare at the whole commitment, the easier it was to say yes without meaning to ask the right questions.
That is the part people skip. The offer can be legitimate and still be arranged to make the easy answer more available than the careful answer. That's where feels manipulative lives. Not in a secret criminal plot, but in the fact that the structure nudges attention toward the part that sounds best and away from the part that changes the math.
So the fair complaint isn't, this is definitely fraud. It's, you've built a thing that rewards confusion and punishes attention. That's a much stronger accusation. And it's also harder for the business to shrug off with a smile. Because if the deal only works when people don't fully understand it, that is a problem even before you start using the word illegal.
Yeah, and the other thing that makes people bristle is the promise that you can just upgrade later, as if later is always simple and neutral. In practice, later usually comes with conditions. You may need the timing to line up, the device to be in the right state, the account to be in good standing, and the paperwork to be in order. Easy later sounds flexible. Often it really means easy if you keep following the script.
That's exactly it. Easy to upgrade later sounds like freedom, but a lot of the time it's freedom with a leash on it. You're not being handed a clean exit. You're being handed a future promise that depends on you staying organized, staying eligible, and staying patient. So the flexibility is real in theory and selective in practice.
And if the pitch has to lean on that kind of selective flexibility, the FAIR standard is simple. The upfront pitch should make the total cost, the obligations, and the exit conditions easy to see without a scavenger hunt. If you need a translator to tell you what you're buying, the design is already doing too much hiding. The next question is how they dress that hiding up so it sounds harmless.
Okay, before we keep acting like this is a cute little phone perk, let's decode the words. Because the pitch is doing half the selling before anybody even gets to the bill. And that's where these plans get slippery.
Start with upgrade, because that's the cleanest trick. It sounds like you're moving up to something better. But most of the time, it's really a set of conditions attached to the next phone, not a clean break from the old one.
And it makes staying in the system sound like a reward.
Exactly. Eligible is another one. It sounds like you earned a prize, when what it usually means is you met the requirements this time, and the offer can disappear if you stop meeting them. That is not nothing. That's the whole gatekeeping part dressed up as encouragement.
So the word is doing customer psychology work. It turns a rule into a compliment, which is a very efficient little piece of salesmanship. Nobody wants to be told, you have permission to keep paying.
That's the useful version. On AT&T's Next Up Anytime terms, for example, the upgrade feature requires an active feature charge, good standing, and at least one monthly payment on both the installment plan and the add-on charge. So the word upgrade suggests ease, but the actual setup is more like continued compliance with a few doors you have to keep open.
That's the part people hear as convenience, and then only later realize it was obligation with nicer lighting. Add-on charge is a perfect example of how a small, administrative-sounding label can make an extra fee feel like part of the normal scenery.
Right, and device payment does similar work. It sounds boring enough that you stop asking what it implies, which is usually financing, timing, and a balance that doesn't disappear just because the marketing says upgrade. The language makes the phone feel separate from the loyalty conditions when they're actually connected.
So what's the sharper version of the complaint, Joe? Is it that these words are misleading, or just that they're polished enough to delay the moment when you realize what you're actually agreeing to?
Mostly the second one, with a little bit of the first. I wouldn't jump straight to misleading in every case, because some of this is probably just standard carrier language. But the practical effect is the same. The offer feels like access, while the obligations are buried in the conditions you have to keep satisfying.
And credit is the word that really sells the fantasy. Verizon says promotional credits stop if eligibility requirements are no longer met, including changing to an ineligible plan or paying off the device payment agreement early. So the credit isn't just sitting there like cash in your pocket.
No, and Verizon's trade-in credit based on promo value can also be reversed if you don't keep active postpaid service, change to an ineligible plan, or pay off early. Their early upgrade terms go further. If the eligible device isn't returned in good working condition, the remaining balance under the original device payment agreement or financing offer can become due on the next bill or card statement. That is a very different thing from, we took your old phone, so everything reset.
Right, because the language makes it feel reversible, like you can just step out whenever you want. But in practice, the system keeps a hook in three places: the plan, the payment, and the condition of the phone you hand back.
That's the cleaner way to say it. The fair version is to tell people, in plain English, what you owe, what you can lose, and what happens if you leave early or change the setup. If the offer only feels simple because the important parts are hidden inside softer words like eligible, credit, and upgrade, then the language is doing too much of the work.
Okay, so the language is one thing, but what does the deal look like when a normal person actually tries to use it? Because the pitch sounds like new phone, easy upgrade, no big deal. And then the paperwork starts clearing its throat.
That's the right place to go. The clean version is that these programs often bundle the phone, the financing, the trade-in, and the service plan into one neat little sales story. And then the conditions live in different places. So the free feeling is real at the counter, but it usually depends on you keeping a bunch of other pieces in place.
And that's the part that bugs people, because the real cost doesn't always show up as one obvious fee. It shows up as, oh, you changed your plan, or, oh, you paid this off early, or, oh, apparently the phone has feelings and must remain in service.
Right, and the annoying part is that this isn't even always hidden in some cinematic villain contract. Verizon's terms, for example, say, promotional credits can stop if you move to an ineligible plan, pay off the device agreement early, transfer the number to another account, or otherwise stop meeting the promotion requirements. That's not one magical gotcha, it's a stack of conditions.
So the savings are real, but they're conditional, which is a very different sentence from free. I keep thinking about how people hear upgrade and picture a simple swap, when what they actually bought was permission to stay inside the system long enough for the credits to land.
Exactly, and the system can get more annoying when you want out. Verizon also says devices on a device payment agreement aren't eligible for trade-in until the agreement is paid in full, which means you may not be able to cleanly reuse that same device as the next trade-in step until the financing is finished. So the device isn't just a device anymore, it's also a timing problem.
That's such a grim little phrase, timing problem. That's how they make it sound like a scheduling issue instead of a restriction. But okay, if I want the fair version of this, what part is just normal financing and what part is the upgrade model making it weird?
Normal financing would be pretty boring and pretty legible. You buy the phone over time, you keep paying until it's yours, and if you leave early, there's still money left to settle. The upgrade model adds the promise that you can swap sooner, but that promise can depend on returning the device on time and in the right condition. AT&T's Next Up Anytime terms, for example, require an active account, an active feature charge, and a timely return of the device in good physical and functional condition. Otherwise, the remaining accelerated balance can still be owed.
So you're not just buying a phone, you're buying a path through the rules. And if you miss a step, the deal gets less magical and more like, congrats, you are now responsible for the part you thought was being waved away.
That's the honest version, yes. And there's one more detail that matters, because it kills the fantasy of a temporary handoff. Verizon's trade-in terms say the trade-in device may need to be in a qualifying condition, and once you relinquish it, it won't be returned. So this is often a one-way move, not a flexible trial period.
That's the piece people don't feel until they're already halfway out the door. The deal feels elastic when you're signing up. Then suddenly, it has a shape and a memory and a list of things you were supposed to know earlier.
And to be fair, not every carrier structure is identical, and not every promo is equally obnoxious. But the common pattern is the important part. The apparent discount is often protected by active service, required returns, condition standards, and the risk that credits stop if you change the setup. So the real question isn't just, what's the price today? It's, what has to stay true later for that price to remain the price?
Yeah, and that's where the suspicion becomes pretty reasonable. If the business model only works when people don't disturb the arrangement, then the carrier has a strong reason to make staying feel easy and leaving feel annoying. That doesn't prove anything sinister, but it does explain why the whole thing is built to look friendly up front and get strict when you try to move. Okay, so after the receipts, the next question is, who actually profits from the whole upgrade circus? Because the pitch is all convenience and shiny new phone energy, but somebody is getting paid for that convenience, and I don't think it's the customer writing the checks in the fun little confetti moment.
Mostly the carrier. Their deal pages are built around qualifying customers, new lines, upgrades, and payment terms that stretch over months, which tells you the value isn't just the sale. It's keeping the relationship alive long enough for the credits to matter. In plain English, they want retention, predictable monthly payments, and fewer people wandering off after the first trade-in high.
So the real prize is not the phone. It's keeping you on the plan long enough that the discount math works for them. And that means the upgrade has to feel easy right when your guard is down and the new screen still smells like hope and plastic.
It's the retention.
Yeah, that's the piece. The offer feels generous because the payment is stretched out, and the leaving part is psychologically annoying, which is a very different thing from saying it is secretly illegal or something. It's just a structure that rewards inertia and punishes attention later.
And annoying is the polite version. Not every annoying structure is deceptive, but annoyance is doing work here. It nudges people to stay, because staying is easier than changing carriers, returning a device, losing credits, or redoing all the boring paperwork nobody wants to think about on a Tuesday night.
So the clean version is, make the upfront moment feel like a win. Then let the friction show up when the customer is already committed. That is not some evil mastermind thing, but it is absolutely a design choice. If it were accidental, the whole setup would be much clumsier and a lot less consistently useful to the business.
Right, and that's why the carrier's incentive matters more than the slogan. If the business gets a longer customer relationship, steadier payments, and a better shot at keeping people from leaving, the offer will keep getting rebuilt in slightly different packaging. You can rename it, simplify one corner, add a shinier trade-in label. The basic shape survives because it keeps solving the same problem for the company.
Joe, am I overstating the lock-in part, or is that basically the point? Because I don't want to pretend every promo is a trap, but I also don't buy the innocent story where the carrier just fell in love with convenience and accidentally made money in the process.
No, that's the stronger version of it. I wouldn't call the payment agreement the same thing as a traditional service contract. And I wouldn't say the company is secretly hiding a dungeon under the offer page. But the promotional structure still uses installment terms and trading credits to shape behavior over time. And that behavior is exactly what the carrier wants. Keep the customer active, keep the bill predictable, keep the exit from feeling clean.
That's the part people skip. They hear reward and stop there, but the reward is usually tied to continued service, continued eligibility, and continued patience. So the customer gets a discount, sure, but the carrier gets a longer shot at your monthly payment stream and a higher chance you won't do the annoying thing and leave.
Which is why these programs keep reappearing. The pitch can change, the logo can change, the wording can get cleaner, but the incentive stays the same. Make retention easy, make churn expensive, and wrap the whole thing in language that sounds like a favor instead of a business strategy. A fairer version would make the total cost obvious, the exit path boring, And the credit rule's simple enough that nobody needs a spreadsheet just to know whether the upgrade is actually worth it.
Okay, so before we drift into polite corporate fog, I think we need to separate the brochure answer from the real answer. The brochure answer is, we make upgrading easier and phones more affordable. The real answer is more like, we made the monthly number feel lighter, so you stop staring at the whole commitment all at once.
That's the clean split. And it matters because those are not the same claim. Lower monthly pain can be genuinely useful, but lower monthly pain is not the same thing as lower total cost, and it is definitely not the same thing as more freedom if you want out later.
Joe, am I overstating it if I say the whole pitch is kind of emotional accounting? Like, don't think about the actual full price. Just think about the tiny monthly bite and how painless it feels right now.
No, that's fair. The pitch is built around making the decision feel easier in the moment. And that is not nothing. Most people are not doing some perfect spreadsheet meditation before buying a phone. They're reacting to relief, convenience, and whatever makes the upgrade feel manageable today.
Right, because nobody walks into that conversation thinking, please help me experience the true economic essence of this device. They think, I want a phone that works, and I do not want to get punched in the face by the upfront price. So, of course, the softer number wins.
Exactly. And that is why the pitch works without being pure fantasy. Convenience is real. A lower feeling monthly payment is real. The problem is when those real benefits are presented as if they automatically mean the whole thing is cheaper, simpler, and more flexible than it actually is.
So the honest version is not, this is a scam. It's, this is structured to feel nicer than it is. That feels more accurate and also more annoying, which is usually how the truth acts.
That's the part worth keeping. Not every annoying structure is fraudulent, and not every convenience product is secretly evil. But once you package financing, trade-in expectations, and carrier lock-in together, the business benefits from inertia. It benefits from you staying put, not just from you liking the phone.
And that's the thing people feel before they can explain it. They don't always have the language for inertia, but they can tell when a plan is making them work harder to understand what they signed up for. Affordable starts sounding less like a fact and more like a mood the ad wants you to adopt.
That's the useful distinction. Affordable can mean easy to start, or it can mean better value once everything is counted. Those are different standards. If the plan is only selling the first one, it should say that plainly instead of borrowing the language of the second one.
So what would count as fair disclosure then? Because if the offer is, here's the monthly number, and by the way, here's what it costs to leave, what happens to the trade-in, and what conditions can change the deal, that feels honest even if I still don't love it.
That's basically the line. If they front-load the awkward parts, total cost, trade-in conditions, switching downsides, and what happens when you want out, then you're choosing convenience with your eyes open. If those parts only show up later, after the comfort has already done its job, then the marketing is leaning on confusion, not just convenience. And that's why people get mad.
So the fair version is, we make upgrading easier, but you should know exactly what you're trading away. The unfair version is when easy quietly means sticky and cheap quietly means you'll feel it later. That is the real answer, and it is a lot less charming than the brochure. Okay, so here's the clean split. One reasonable take is these upgrade programs are just a neat way to keep monthly payments predictable. And the other is that they're built to make people stop thinking too hard. both can be true, which is annoying because I'd like one villain and a pitchfork.
That's the better way to frame it. If you know exactly what you're signing up for, predictable payments are not some moral failure. A lot of people would rather pay a manageable amount and not have to suddenly drop a bunch of cash every few years.
Sure, and I'm not pretending everybody wants to own a phone forever like it's a family heirloom. But the suspicious version is that the whole thing makes the easy choice feel like the smart choice, when the smart choice might just be the choice that keeps you from noticing how much you're giving up later. I get that predictable payments are nice, but the whole setup depends on people not doing the annoying part, reading the terms, comparing the math, and
a lot of people won't. That's the point you have to take seriously. If a program only feels simple because it quietly assumes inertia, that's not some tiny side issue. That's the business model doing work.
Right. And I'm not saying that makes it evil. I'm saying it makes it asymmetric. The company gets the advantage of your not thinking, and you get the burden of noticing the trade-offs after you're already comfortable.
That's fair, but I'd separate asymmetric from deceptive. A lot of consumer systems are structured so the easier path is also the more profitable path for the seller. That doesn't automatically mean people are being lied to. It means the design rewards speed and punishes careful comparison.
And that's where I get irritated, because the moment you make the careful option feel like homework, you know exactly who you're nudging. Not everyone is trying to run a spreadsheet in the store. Some people just want the new phone and a calmer bill.
Totally. That's the strongest argument for the programs, actually. They reduce the friction of a purchase people already want to make. If someone values convenience, likes upgrading often, and understands the obligations, the plan can be perfectly rational.
Okay, but that if is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Where do you draw the line between rational convenience and a setup that leans on confusion? Because if the deal only works cleanly for people who already know how to decode it, that's not exactly a glowing endorsement.
The line is whether the important trade-offs are plain up front. If you can answer, without squinting, what you owe, what happens if you leave, what happens to the remaining balance, and what you lose by upgrading again, then I'm more comfortable calling it convenience than manipulation.
And if you can't answer that without a 20-minute customer service conversation, then the program is acting more like a filter than a favor. Not illegal, not necessarily fraudulent, just designed so the easiest path is the one that keeps you moving in the direction they want.
That's the piece I'd keep. I'm not interested in pretending every upgrade plan is a trick, but I am interested in asking whether the design makes it too easy to confuse "I can afford this monthly" with "this is actually the best deal for me."
So let me push that a little. Are we being too generous if we call that confusion instead of design? Because to me, the result matters less than the fact that the result is so useful to the seller.
No, I think the design matters. I just don't want to collapse every annoying design into a moral accusation. Some of it is genuinely meant to match how people budget. Some of it is probably meant to keep the sale easy. Those are not the same thing, but they can live in the same program.
That's the part that bugs me. The good faith shopper gets a workable tool. The distracted shopper gets nudged into paying for convenience they didn't price out. And the company doesn't have to be evil to benefit from that gap.
Exactly. The fair complaint isn't, "You may never offer a plan." It's, "Don't hide the catch in the emotional excitement of the upgrade." If the trade-off is real, say it plainly. If the exit is ugly, don't bury that in cheerful language.
That's why I keep coming back to the same boring standard, which is usually where the honest answer lives. Clear payment, clear obligation, clear exit. and no little fog around the trade-off. If it still looks good after that, fine. If it doesn't, the customer didn't need a surprise bill to learn it.
That's the clean version. If somebody still wants the plan after hearing the downside in plain English, great. That's a choice. If not, they shouldn't have to discover the downside 3 bill cycles later, after the easy version already did its job.
Okay, let's clear out the dumbest version of this first. It is not magic, and it is not free. But it is also not automatically a cartoon villain scheme. The annoying part is that people talk about upgrade programs like there are only 2 options: free phone or total ripoff. That's too stupid to be useful.
That's the cleanup we need. The word upgrade makes people flatten everything into one story, when the real story is usually some mix of device payments, promo credits, and rules about staying eligible. So the first correction is simple. The upfront feeling can be cheap, but the total thing is still a payment structure.
Joe, am I overstating it if I say the word free is doing way too much work here? Because the whole trick seems to be that people hear the monthly number and stop asking what future them is going to owe.
No, that's fair. Verizon's own setup is a good example. Some customers can pay the full retail price or use device payments, and whether promo credits keep going depends on the specific deal details and staying eligible over the term. So the offer is real, but it is conditional in a way that matters. That is not wizardry. It is a discount with strings.
And the strings are the part everybody pretends not to see until they try to leave. If the credits stop, if the balance gets accelerated, if the device has to come back in decent shape, suddenly the easy plan starts looking like a plan that really wanted you to stay put and behave.
Right, but that is exactly why "it is a scam" is too sloppy. The more accurate criticism is usually about cost visibility and flexibility. The company is not hiding the existence of the rules so much as making the nice part loud and the annoying part a little more work to think through.
That's the part people skip. They hear $0 down or upgrade now, and their brain basically hands the steering wheel to the marketing department. I am not saying everyone is helpless. I am saying the design rewards not reading too hard.
Sure, but there is also a legitimate version of this. Some people do want to spread out payments, trade in often, and keep the monthly bill predictable. AT&T's own setup shows that you can upgrade after the device is paid in full. And for some plans, you can upgrade sooner by paying an extra monthly charge. That is not a fake option. It is a convenience premium.
So the smarter version is not never use it. It's know what you're buying before your thumbs get excited on the app. That's the part that bugs me. People either act like the convenience is pure poison or pretend the convenience has no price tag at all.
Exactly. The useful question is whether you're paying for the phone or paying for the option to change your mind sooner. Those are different things, and smart consumers can decide either way. If you keep devices a long time and don't care about annual upgrades, the math can look very different from someone who wants the newest model every cycle.
And that decision has to include the ugly little exit costs, not just the shiny monthly number. If leaving early means the promo falls away or some balance gets due all at once, then the cheap-looking plan is really asking you to stay disciplined longer than normal people like to stay disciplined.
That is the honest way to think about it. When the terms say, the credits continue only if you stay eligible, or that leaving early can leave you owing more, the deal is basically telling you where the pressure is. That does not make it immoral by itself. It just means the flexibility is part of what you are buying or giving up.
which is why the softest version of the criticism is wrong too. It is not, everyone is being robbed, and it is not, everyone is being irrational. It is, some people genuinely benefit, but the program works best when you do not ask too many questions while signing up.
That's the better version of the criticism. Not hidden wizardry, not pure theft, just a structure that sells convenience by borrowing against your attention and your flexibility. The uncomfortable part is that consumers are not only victims here. A lot of us actively choose the shiny monthly number because it feels easier now.
Yeah, and that is where it gets annoying because future you is never standing at the counter signing the deal. So the next question is whether we are actually being played or whether we keep feeding the whole setup because the monthly number looks cute. Okay, so if we stop pretending carriers are the only adult in the room, here's the annoying next step. Are we part of the reason this stuff keeps working? Because I don't think people are buying upgrade programs just for the spreadsheet. They're buying the feeling.
That's probably the cleanest way to say it. The carrier has the structure, but the customer has the appetite for the structure. And those two things meet in the store when everyone is looking at the shiny part first.
You don't buy because you need a phone so much as because it feels like a reset. New screen, new battery, new smug little belief that this time you'll keep the thing in better shape, and your old one is
old enough to retire without a speech.
Exactly. And that reset feeling is doing a lot of unpaid labor. The monthly increase can look tiny when you're standing there. The trade-in credit sounds like you're beating the system, and the deal feels clean because all the messy parts are spread out so far that your brain politely stops caring about them.
Which is why I don't love turning this into a sermon about consumer weakness. Convenience is not a moral failure. It's just a very exploitable human preference, especially when the product is wrapped in a fresh start story and the costs are delayed enough to feel abstract.
So where do you draw the line then? Because I don't want to say, well, people should have known better and hand everybody a little guilt trophy, but I also don't want to pretend the system survives on carrier genius alone. Somebody has to keep saying yes to the short version of the story.
That's fair. I'd draw it here. People are responsible for not lying to themselves, but companies are responsible for not making the lie easy. The short version of the story isn't automatically deception. Sometimes it's just how attention works. The problem starts when the deal is designed so the hard part only shows up after commitment, when backing out is annoying and admitting you didn't read it feels worse than staying put.
That's the thing people skip. They hear consumer choice and act like that ends the conversation. But choice can be real and still be badly shaped. If the offer is built to make the easy feeling immediate and the actual cost foggy, then the customer isn't powerless. They're just being nudged toward the version of the deal that flatters impatience.
And that's why I'd keep the criticism practical instead of moral. The useful question isn't who is bad. It's who gets paid when the details stay blurry, and who has to do extra work to understand the real terms. That points straight at the incentive problem, without pretending every buyer is asleep at the wheel.
Right, because a lot of people are not stupid. They're busy, tired, or just horny for a nicer phone and a cleaner story. And honestly, that last one is the sneaky part. The story feels cleaner than saying, I'm going to finance this thing, maybe trade it in later, and hope the future version of me doesn't hate this decision.
Which brings you to the fair standard. If the business wants to call it an upgrade, fine. But the offer should make the real structure visible up front. What is financed? What is conditional? What happens if you leave early? And what you actually owe if the trade-in or promotion doesn't land the way the headline implies. Don't bury the hard part behind the dopamine.
Yeah. If the deal only feels free while you're excited and gets expensive once you've cooled off, then the system is leaning on your future self to notice what your present self was too happy to read. That's not proof of evil. It's just a very convenient way to sell confusion. And the next question is how to make the honest version loud enough that people can't miss it. Okay, if we're trying to fix this instead of just rolling our eyes at it, what would actually make upgrade plans harder to game and easier to understand? Because the complaint is obvious. The useful part is changing the deal so the confusion stops paying rent.
Start with the disclosure. Put the total remaining obligation right next to the monthly price and make the exit conditions visible before someone signs. Not in a terms link, not in a paragraph nobody reads, but right where the offer is being sold.
So the deal should show the real number, not just the soft number? Because that's the trick people keep feeling. The headline is tiny, and the part that actually controls your options is hiding 3 screens away.
That's the better version, yes. If the credit ends when you change plans, pay off early, or transfer your number, the customer should see that before they treat the promo like free money. Those are not tiny footnotes. Those are the moments that change the deal.
Joe, is the main fix just better disclosure, or do you think the plans themselves are too tangled to make honest at the retail level? Because if the answer is just explain it better, companies are going to hear, keep the same mess, but use simpler verbs.
Mostly it's disclosure, but the disclosure has to be structured so it actually tells the truth. A plan should separate ownership from financing, from trade-in, from carrier credits, because those are different things, and people get pushed to treat them like one neat bundle when they aren't.
That's the part I keep coming back to. What do I own? What am I financing? What am I trading in? And what happens if I leave? If the answer to any of those takes a scavenger hunt, the offer is designed to make friction feel normal.
And that's not just vibes. The FCC's handset financing and unlocking discussions point in the same direction. People need clearer disclosure about how portable the phone really is and how tied the device still is to the carrier. If a phone is functionally locked to a relationship, consumers deserve to know that up front.
Right, because the pitch is always about freedom. But if the device still carries obligations, the better phrase is probably you can upgrade instead of you can leave. Those are not the same promise, and consumers can tell when the language is doing extra work.
Exactly. And the product design should help instead of hiding the ball. Show the remaining balance, the credit conditions, the unlock status, and any early exit consequences in one place. That way, the customer is comparing real offers, not guessing at what later turns into a bill problem.
The other fix is boring but important. Cleaner language around damage, return requirements, and what counts as giving the device back in good enough shape. AT&T's installment terms show that condition can affect the final balance. So that needs to be plain English, not buried in policy soup.
That would cut down a lot of the fake surprise. Some people are not being careless. They're being sold a version of the plan that front loads the good news and delays the obligations until commitment is already high. That's where the design feels misleading, even when it may still be technically disclosed.
And that's the fairness test I'd keep. If you can't tell quickly what you owe, what you own, what ends the discount, and how you get out, the plan is too foggy. Not automatically illegal, not automatically evil, just not honest enough to trust without a second look.
That's the clean standard. Fair doesn't mean no strings. It means the strings are visible before you sign, and the price of leaving is obvious before the excitement kicks in.
So the honest ending is pretty clean. These programs aren't automatically bad, but the free feeling is doing a lot of the selling. The phone is real, the convenience is real, but the brain gets nudged to act like convenience cancels cost. And that is the part that deserves side-eye.
That's the fair version. If somebody wants the easy path, keeps the same carrier, and values not having to think about the whole purchase every time, they may be happy. But happy isn't the same thing as free. It's financing, trade-in math, and a bunch of obligations wearing a friendlier label.
So what's the sharper version of the complaint here, Joe? Because I don't want to flatten it into everything is a scam. If the real issue is more like the offer is built to make people underprice the strings.
The offer is built to make the strings feel optional until you need them. Now that's basically the point. The shiny part is up front, where nobody feels pain yet. The expensive part is pushed into monthly obligations, trade-in conditions, and the moment you ask, very innocently, what happens if you want to leave or pause the whole arrangement?
That's the part that makes people squint. Nobody hears you are financing a device and giving up some flexibility and thinks, great, what a steal. They hear upgrade. They hear free. And then the boring part gets mentally filed under later, which is exactly where the model wants it.
And that's not because customers are gullible morons. It's because the whole presentation is built to keep the emotional moment separate from the mechanical one. The carrier benefits when the customer is most focused on the new phone feeling, not on the question of how long the money trail runs or what condition the trade-in has to be in when the music stops.
So the real divide isn't smart people see through it and dumb people don't. It's whether you know what game you're playing. If you know the trade is convenience for flexibility, that's a choice. If you only find out when you're trying to leave, the structure got more out of you than it probably should have.
That's the line I'd keep too. Annoying is not the same as fraudulent, and misleading is not always illegal. But the consumer still has to live with the result. If the offer only feels simple until you ask what happens at the end, then the simplicity was purchased with your confusion. That is a design problem, even when it's not a crime.
And that is why free is such a useful word for sellers. It's flexible in a deeply annoying way. It can mean no money now, money later, you'll probably stay, or please don't read the part that explains the exit.
Which is why the practical rule is boring but useful. Read the part about payments, trade-in terms, upgrade timing, and what happens if you want out before you like the offer. Not because every plan is a trap, but because that's where the real relationship is defined. If the easy part is loud and the exit is vague, the buyer is the one taking on the fog.
So your boundary line is basically convenient is fine, hidden is not. If they want to sell me on convenience, cool. If they want me to feel like I'm getting something for nothing while the fine print quietly owns my weekends for the next 2 years, that's where I start getting rude about it.
That's the clean version. The consumer-friendly version is not no strings attached. It's strings you can actually see before you sign. That is the difference between a decent deal and a deal that quietly eats your flexibility. And if the company wants to call that free, fine. But then we should be allowed to laugh at the word a little.
Yeah, that's probably the right ending. Upgrade programs aren't pure scams, but the free feeling is mostly a sales effect. And sometimes the bill is just hiding in the part nobody wants to read. So before you sign, check the exit terms, check the trade-in conditions, and ask yourself whether you're buying a phone or renting flexibility with better branding.
So that wraps this one up. Thanks for spending a few minutes with Say the Question. Follow along, and we'll be back tomorrow with another one.